Way back in the day, when we had not seen a Romulan ship in over 30 years, the Diderotix-class Romulan battlecruiser blew us away when it appeared on the television screen and seemed to dwarf the Next Generation Enterprise. Amazing is what Picard would say when it decloaks, and everyone on the bridge had an expression of awe mixed with terror. It would seem that the Romulans had come a long way in their 50 years of no contact with the Federation. The last time such an encounter occurred, a mortal battle followed between Kirk's Enterprise and the comparatively small Romulan bird of prey, which seemed to be a nice match. But this Romulan warship, at first glance judging by size alone, would probably outclass the Enterprise. The burning question still remains to this day. What would happen if a battle occurred between these two gorgeous capital ships? Would the good guys still win in spite of the apparent size difference? Now, I've decided to break this video up into two parts. In this part, we'll compare these two ships' technical aspects, and in part two, we will actually play out the combat scenarios. I'm going to do a very brief plug for my Patreon supporters at patreon.com/resurrected. I prefer not to have corporate sponsors or third-party sponsors, so we'll just rely on Patreon as much as possible. But there you can see I have many custom renders for my higher tier supporters, and I'm very thankful to these supporters. I very much like making these customized renders of whatever starships I have available for them. I'm a one-man show here, and YouTube ad revenue is slowly getting more consistent, but it's never that consistent. So Patreon is the best way to support me. The next best way is to comment, subscribe, and like this video, or you can drop me a super thanks. I also have 3D models available in Blender format at my CG Trader store at cgtrader.com/lost starships, all linked in the description. Now let's get back to the Galaxy-class starship versus the Diderotix Warbird. In that first encounter with this Romulan warship, the Romulan commander assures Picard that if they wanted to destroy the Enterprise, that they would already be dead, with high confidence. Let me point out that when Kirk first encounters the Romulan bird of prey back in 2266, he had several advantages compared to Picard about 100 years later, and I do have a video about this you'll find linked in the description. But Kirk's biggest advantage was actual knowledge about the nature of the Romulan ship. The last transmission from Outpost 4, right before the Romulans blasted it, gave Kirk a tremendous amount of data. And the Romulan cloaking device was not perfect back then either. Sensors still revealed a lot about the likely power and performance of that ship, plus their approximate position. In Picard's situation 100 years later, there were none of these advantages. The Romulan cloaking device maintained superior stealth and revealed nothing about the Romulan warbird. The Romulans did not preemptively attack any Federation targets to reveal their secrets. The only reason that the Romulans revealed themselves to the Enterprise was so that they could confer about the mystery of who or what was scooping up remote colonies and outposts from both powers. It is safe to say that the Romulans knew something about the capabilities of the Federation's most powerful ships, the Galaxy-class starship. The Romulans have always had an intelligence advantage. Even if you don't account for their clandestine operations, simply being able to observe the Enterprise while cloaked would probably tell them something about the new Starfleet ship. So really, if we were to set up a scenario where this is a fair fight, anything like what happened in the old series episode Balance of Terror, a battle must take place at some point after this encounter, and we'll get there in a bit if you bear with me. Perhaps a fair fight would be when Tomalak crossed the border with his warbird to challenge the Enterprise at Galorndon Core in 2366. This would be a far more fair scenario if Tomalak really wanted to fight, and we'll get to this in a minute. But first, let's start comparing the data, and we'll cover 5 raw data categories plus a 6th category that has to do with surprises that either ship could come up with. The 5 categories are the size, the armament, the defenses, engines and power, and stealth and sensors. Engines and power and stealth and sensors are both one and the same category. And since the Enterprise has no cloak, all will rely heavily on how the Enterprise might be able to detect the warbird. Okay, so the first category is the hull size. And it is simply remarkable that the Romulans are able to construct such a large ship. Because in Star Trek, the largest ship we've seen so far was the Enterprise D. Now, size is not always the most important factor when considering the capabilities of a starship, but it can tell us a lot about what the ship is for. It is very well established that the Enterprise is 640 meters long. That's a very hefty size for any ship in the Star Trek universe. It has 42 decks, 1,000 to 5,000 crew depending on its mission, lots of shuttles, many that are warp capable, and plenty of cargo space. As stated in my previous video, we believe the Galaxy class is designed as a kind of very long-range command exploration cruiser with a heavy emphasis on diplomacy. Now, the size of the D'Deridex is not clear, nor is it ever stated on screen. The original designer of the D'Deridex, Andrew Probert, says the D'Deridex is over 1,300 meters in length. If that's true, the D'Deridex, yes, even with the gap between the upper and lower hull, is 4 to 5 times the volume of the Enterprise. The DS9 technical manual, which unfortunately was not written by Michael Okuda and crew, like the original TNG technical manual, states that the size was about 1,041 meters. I don't believe this is accurate, but let's say that this is right. The D'Deridex is still a much more voluminous ship due to its length and height, which would still make it at least about twice the size of a Galaxy-class starship. In what respect does size count here? Well, a larger hull means you can simply have more or larger power generation, more space for weapons mounts, as well as the possibility of carrying things like support craft, which is something that Andrew Probert seemed to imply that the D'Deridex can do. In fact, these two shuttle bays here on the front, given the 1,300 meter size, could have even accommodated something like a Defiant-class heavy escort right in there. So it wouldn't surprise me if the D'Deridex could even support some fighter wings. Now, that's a lot of speculation, and we never really see this as a thing on screen, so we're going to set that aside for now, but feel free to comment about that. But let's get on to armament. The Enterprise has apparently 12 of these fantastically awesome collimated Type 10 phaser arrays covering its entire hull. These phaser arrays are versatile, they can fire in all directions, and can be tuned for all kinds of special situations. The range is also an impressive 300,000 kilometers. Now, this range may be the maximum range, but maybe not the effective range. The Enterprise also has 2 primary torpedo launchers, one forward and one aft, and each torpedo launcher is capable of firing an impressive spread of up to 10 photon torpedoes according to the TNG technical manual, or several torpedoes in succession. The saucer section, when separated, can also fire torpedoes, but it's not clear if that auxiliary torpedo launcher can fire the kind of torpedo spreads that the primary launchers can. So this is an impressive torpedo capacity. The D'Deridex on screen has been shown to use a variety of weapons. We see them using a beam weapon very much like the Enterprise's phasers, but usually in a green or bluish color. We see them using a kind of pulse disruptor bolt. We could call these disruptor cannons. And by DS9, we finally see them firing some torpedoes that really look just like photon torpedoes but green. Now, I'm also going to note that, unfortunately, the special effects teams never fired the D'Deridex weapons from the correct locations, according to Andrew Probert. So in my animations, we're going to fire them from the right locations, just so you know. Now, unfortunately, a detailed technical manual was never created for these ships, and the number and type of these weapons is open to speculation. And even though Riker asked the Romulan commander in the episode Contagion if they had phasers available, Romulan energy weapons have always been referred to as disruptors. It's kind of a distinction without much of a difference in my opinion. I've always maintained that a phaser is simply a kind of disruptor that utilizes nadion particles for its delivery. And in the TNG episode The Defector, it is said that the Romulans have the same precision control over their disruptors that Starfleet has with their weapons. And even back in Kirk's time, the Romulan plasma torpedoes seemed to baffle and awe Starfleet personnel. It's not clear if the Romulans are still using plasma torpedoes by the 24th century, photon torpedoes, or a combination of both. There are a couple of ways to game this out, in that a photon torpedo has the advantage of long range, even at warp speed, whereas we're not so clear about the ability of plasma torpedoes by the 24th century. But in the DS9 episode, Shadows and Symbols, it was clear that the Romulans were still using them as they tried to secretly arm that hospital base on Bajor's moon with plasma torpedoes. I believe the Romulans have both photon and plasma torpedoes and use them interchangeably. I believe that the D'Deridex is armed with both, and I'll explain why in a minute. So it seems that the Romulans' weapon technology is at least on par with Starfleet, if not even a bit more advanced. However, the emphasis of these weapons may be different between the two ships. There is an important factor for any weapon system called rate of fire, and I believe there would be a difference here. Since the Romulans have the luxury of a surprise attack, Romulan weapons benefit from devastatingly powerful strikes in a very short period of time, so that the target is destroyed or disabled quickly. If conducting a surprise attack using the cloaking device, the Romulans would be fools not to use their more specialized, slow-charging, but devastating plasma torpedoes and their pulse disruptor cannons. But if surprise is lost, it might be better to switch to a more sustained fire mode using things like their disruptor arrays and photon torpedoes. The Enterprise, in comparison, while their phaser array can be charged for slow-firing bursts or less powerful sustained rate of fire, precision firing, all kinds of ways, the Romulan disruptor beam arrays are pretty similar. I believe overall the D'Deridex is going to be the better armed ship with a wide variety of weapons designed for specific combat tactics compared to the Galaxy class. And the Romulans confidently boasted this several times, while Picard went out of his way to avoid engaging these ships and never disputed their destructive capacity. Alright, now it's time to cover defenses. As far as defenses go, we really do not know if Federation shields are better or worse than the Romulan shields. There is something to consider though. Romulan cloaking technology does suck up a lot of power that might have been allocated to other systems such as weapons and shields. The defenses of the Romulan ship, especially when cloaked, might be a lot better if they did not rely on power. Say, for instance, armor instead of shields. While armor may not be as good as shields, it can be hardened in a number of ways and resist high-energy weapons. I believe it's likely that the D'Deridex is better armored than the Enterprise. Most likely the Enterprise's shields are more dynamic and adaptive, perhaps they recharge faster, while the Romulans emphasize a bit more armor and hull tanking. I feel it's unlikely that the Galaxy class has more overall, I guess you could say, hit points in gaming terms compared to the D'Deridex. So now let's get into power, engines, and maneuvering. The D'Deridex is the more massive ship, and as said before, it's likely using armor as well as shields for defense, which is likely going to give it more weight. This means it needs to expend more energy for maneuvers, but does this really matter? It's true in the 24th century there is technology to cancel out mass and inertia, but it still requires energy to do so. So if we're talking about maneuvering at sublight velocities, it really comes down to the power between these two ships. Now both ships have an interesting power source, although very different. The Federation uses matter-antimatter annihilation as its primary power source, while the Romulans use an artificial quantum singularity. So this is basically a small artificial black hole. Now, maybe someday we will do a deep dive into the science of these two different power sources. Right now, our current scientific understanding is pretty clear about matter-antimatter reactions, although there's no indication that this is powerful enough to warp time and space. But this matter-antimatter reaction that Starfleet ships use are definitely far more powerful than any kind of fusion reaction. However, the Romulan quantum singularity as a power source is an amazing idea. So even for a small black hole, it could generate many suns worth of Hawkins radiation. which would be plenty of power. And it may not require antimatter or dilithium, so it seems like a great advantage. How the hell the Romulans are able to transport something like a mini black hole would be beyond me. But such power generation tech seems like a match or even superior to Starfleet tech. It just has some drawbacks, such as the possibility of certain time anomalies, and depending on the size of the quantum singularity, it cannot really be shut down, unlike the warp core of the Enterprise. However, Starfleet has always seemed to have a monopoly on maneuvering their ships. I don't really think there is too much of a difference here, but I would give maneuverability to the Galaxy class to some degree. Now, at warp speed, there's no question. These ships are comparable for top speed at warp 9.6, but the Romulans cannot sustain the speed in the same way that the Enterprise can without burning out several of their warp coils, as demonstrated in the episode Tin Man. Therefore, at warp speed, the Enterprise has the overall advantage. With full warp capability, it could chase down or run away from a Diderotix class. And finally, we get to sensors and stealth. Now, this is not really a comparison between two similar attributes, but more of a contest between the two different attributes. Unless the Enterprise is hiding and powered down or in a nebula or a gas cloud somewhere, she really has no stealth. The Galaxy class is packed full of high-powered sensors, science probes, sensor buoys, and has a very well-trained science team, so this is an exploration ship after all. While the Diderotix is capable as an exploration ship and has sometimes been utilized as such, this is not their focus, unlike the Galaxy class. Stealth, on the other hand, is paramount for the Romulans. Diderotix class ships can easily travel at warp 6 while maintaining effective stealth, and only rarely has the Enterprise been able to detect these ships with sensors, and even then there was never any certainty about what it was they were detecting. Nor could they isolate their approximate position like Kirk could do with the Enterprise's sensors back in 2266. Romulan cloaking tech has come a long way since then. Now eventually, with time, the Enterprise's excellent command crew and science team could probably devise a rough method of detection. Perhaps they could set up a series of probes with a tachyon detection grid. Now this technology didn't come till a little bit later, and tachyon detection grids are not foolproof either, as demonstrated by Commander Sela in the episode Redemption. So in spite of the Enterprise's superior sensors, there probably is not going to be time to devise a way to detect the Romulan ship. So we get to the last category, surprises and unorthodox abilities of these ships. Now the Galaxy class has a number of tricks up its sleeve. It can, in certain situations, separate the saucer section. It has a large degree of sensor probes. It typically comes with a highly developed engineering and science team, and it has the navigational deflector dish, which seems to be a Swiss Army knife of an energy projector. The Diderotix, on the other hand, has a unique and powerful power source in its quantum singularity, which may give it some abilities that are unforeseen, but more obviously it's a massive ship, enough to utilize smaller ships or support ships. But like I said, we're not going to say it's using support ships or fighters, because we haven't seen it do so on screen so far. But you guys are probably already anticipating how a one-on-one combat match would go between these two ships, and the rest are going to get kind of emotional about the outcome. Now listen guys, I get it. It's perfectly natural for humans to want their hero ships to prevail in any outcome. But we'll just have to see in part 2, won't we? Which, if it's not already by the time you watch this, it should be well within a couple of weeks of this video release. But do tell me in the comments how you think this would play out. Although the script for the showdown is already written, it's not set in stone, and your comments might be taken into account. Meanwhile, it's come to my attention that many in the United States especially are kind of disappointed in the way this country is going after the recent election. I'll never inject much politics into my YouTube channel, so consider my videos a nice little break from all this political anxiety. It's going to be a while yet before our civilization gets its act together enough to start reaching for the stars, but I shall always be optimistic about this, and optimism is our best survival instinct. And to quote Charlie Chaplin, "To those who can hear me I say, do not despair, the misery that is upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear human progress. and that entire speech is full of gems. So as usual, subscribe, like, comment. In the end credits, I've included the Patreon supporters from patreon.com/resurrected. Till later, space friends.